Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of The Balanced Lens, where we examine faith, culture, and politics from a Christian worldview. Now, a major story in the US last week has been the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel from late night TV. There's a few clips we want to share.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. We hit some new lows over the weekend.
And so that was his original monologue, which ultimately got him in a lot of trouble. There was a response from MSNBC here where there's a lot of criticism of the Trump administration.
Now has ABC and its parent company Disney in crisis. So first, let me tell you tonight, we have new reporting and some special guests on the internal decision-making there, a company that has caved but may yet change gears again. Meanwhile, this Kimmel suspension has galvanized this national debate about Trump's effort to censor and silence critics and the press. And up top, I can tell you there is broad evidence of a broad plot here.
So you see that many on the left think that this is part of a broader plot by the Trump administration to silence essentially late night TV hosts that don't agree with his view. Now, from the right, we have a response from Ben Shapiro, which I thought was interesting here. And here he talks about government overreach and what exactly that could mean.
Kimmel go. For whatever reason, I'm very happy to see him go. It was a horror show. His morality is completely backwards. The question is whether the federal government had to do with him being taken off the air. And this is where, again, policy cannot be a blunderbuss. Charlie Kirk was killed doing free speech. He was killed engaging in political debate. And one of the legacies that Charlie Kirk leaves is the necessity for such political debate, necessity for free speech. And again, that doesn't mean speech without consequences. It means the necessity for debate. And what that requires that the government not be involved, for example, in shutting down free debate. So the question with regard to Kimmel is whether this is an organic outgrowth of natural outrage over Jimmy Kimmel or whether this was forced by the federal government. The FCC.
Ben Shapiro's response to all of this, especially in regards to the role of government overreach and how this could have affected the decision to suspend him. Now, what's interesting about this is that Kimmel did apologize, and he made a very tearful apology, especially galvanizing a lot of people around him to have high ratings again for his comeback.
Attention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't. For those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way. I have many friends and family members on the other side who I love and remain close to, even though we don't agree on politics at all. I don't think the murderer who shot Charlie Kirk represents anyone. This was a sick person who believed violence was a solution, and it isn't. Erica Kirk forgave the man who shot her husband. She forgave him. That is an example we should follow. If you believe in the teachings of Jesus, as I do, there it was. That's it. A selfless act of grace, forgiveness from a grieving widow. It touched me deeply. And I hope it touches many. And if there's anything we should take from this tragedy to carry forward, I hope it will be that.
So again, this was a very tearful apology on his return back to late night TV show after being suspended for a week. Now, to give you an overview of his ratings, what have they been like for the last really 10 years? And so it's interesting. Take a look here. You know, going back actually to 2015, 15 years, we do see his ratings have been declining for a very long time. And so that's part of this conversation as well. I think another thing that's important in this conversation is the timing of his comments and whether or not he, categorically lied here. And so interesting, he made his monologue on September 15th, which was a Monday, essentially, throwing MAGA under the bus. Day before, New York Times released an article here saying that the suspect had leftist ideology. So a full 24 hours before his actual monologue. So interesting here. A couple of things happening. The crux of the controversy here is this. In his monologue on September 15th, he said, We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them. In other words, he implied or asserted the shooter was affiliated with or could be associated with MAGA. Clearly, the shooter, Tyler Robinson, had hardened left-wing ideology. And so the question remains, should he have been taken off the air? Was this decision right?
It's my personal belief that he should not have been taken off the air if it was pressure by the government. Actually, in that Ben Shapiro clip, he talks about it in more detail. It is a very dangerous situation to get into where the government can decide what people say and what people cannot say. I don't like Jimmy Kimmel at all. I don't watch any of his shows, but it is a very wrong line to walk where the government will step in and actually cancel or take people off air because they don't agree with what they say. I think that's a bad precedence to set. Now, with that said, it is absolutely the right of the people to push back on content that they don't like. And I think in this case, that's what happened. There was a lot of pressure put on Disney to silence this type of behavior because in that period of our US history, we were in a very crisis situation. This political attack, this assassination, this martyrdom, we got into that last week, but it was a very sensitive topic. And a lot of people were hurt by the fact that rather than silencing the left side, rather than saying like, hey, guys, it's pretty much what he did in his apology. Like, hey, this was not supported by our parties. Both sides disagree with it. Violence is not the answer. We should have open debate. We should have conversation. What Charlie Kirk actually stood for. Rather than saying that in his opening monologue, he decides to put more fuel on the fire. And actually, Disney came out and said that's the main reason why they pulled the show. Because in a period of time when it was a very sensitive political scene, they didn't want to add fuel to the fire, and so they pulled him off the air. I don't even think they used the canceled terminology. I think that was added on by media outlets afterwards. They literally pulled him off the air because the following night, following the back pressure that he was getting, he wanted to go and double down on his comments, which have kept adding more fuel to the fire. So in this case, I think to answer the question, I don't think government should get involved. I think the people should stand up and should voice their opinions on these things, and media outlets should respond to it, right? ABC lost a ton of ad affiliates post those comments, even after they put them back on. The advertisers decided not to go back with them, and I think that's what you should do.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The whole episode, it was happening during a sensitive time. So I mean, there are two sides, right? So on one side, the arguments that I've heard for removing Kimmel is like media broadcasts have responsibility and standards that they have to maintain. So did Kimmel, for example, violate company policies? In that case, it's justified. Did he spread misinformation, which, as Dennis showed, it seems like it was clear that the point he was making was not accurate. And then there's a point of like maintaining the public trust and the corporate brand itself, right? These are all the reasons why people would say that he should be disciplined. Now, against the disciplining, the arguments against disciplining, you do not want to have any interference in free speech or editorial independence, right? And if you look at these late night commentary, they often push boundaries. There's comedy, there's satire, and you definitely do not want government pressure. The FCC chairman should not be making threats. Someday, the tables will turn. If that's a leg on which people are standing, they'll regret it later. There is always a slippery slope, right? When the censorship comes. But throughout media history in the US, media has always had the luxury to speak their mind. They have given a lot of leeway. And it's one of the foundations of a very sound democracy, even if we don't like what they say. Kimmel's comments were ill-timed and maybe even insensitive, but he may argue that he was just doing what he always does. And also, you have to be careful, right? Even if somebody violates something, the punishment should not be worse than the offense itself. So my personal reaction when I first saw his video was that I was looking for more. Like whatever he said did not bother me at all. I thought there was something more controversial that he said, so I was waiting for something more. And that's it. Like this is very normal in late night comedy. Worse has happened all the time, right? So it's up to the company to make the best decision they want about their finances and their brand image. They have the autonomy, but governments should stay out of it.
I also want to add one more point before you go, Dennis. It is mind boggling to me that the left would complain about taking Jimmy Kimmel off air when during the entire Biden administration, conservative voices were being taken down by direction of the Biden administration. These are documents that have been released. Google just admitted a couple of weeks ago that they were asked by the Biden administration to take down conservative voices during election time, during different activities. There was no uproar at that time. Actually, it was the direct opposite. And I think as a society, if we want to move forward, we need to have civil conversation about stuff without being worried about losing our jobs or being worried about laughed off the face of the earth and silenced by every which group.
No, those are great points, and thanks for bringing that up. My take, suspending him was the right decision, primarily because he's an employee of Disney. As a Disney employee and host of a show with steadily declining ratings, he made misleading claims about the shooter's affiliations. Now, obviously, these claims were contradicted by the available evidence. They lacked any authoritative support at the time, as you can see from the New York Times article. But here's the catch. In doing so, he alienated a significant portion of his audience. To illustrate, if you're a restaurant cook or I'm a restaurant cook and I deliberately spit on half of the food for my guests, the business is going to lose half of its customers. Kimmel, similarly, he cultivated a divisive brand for years. He consistently insults a large share of the country, and his declining ratings reflect that reality. Now, to add on to your point, especially in a politically charged environment, such as the aftermath of such a tragic death, he chose to escalate rather than unify, alienating 50% of one's customer base. It's not good business practice, right? It's not responsible stewardship of a network platform. His suspension was justified. Now, on the right, people will argue that what he said infringed on the First Amendment protections. That's misplaced. That's not necessarily true. I think, Bijou, you mentioned courts have long granted comedians, satirists, commentators wide latitude to make, provocative, even misleading comments. These are statements that are protected by the First Amendment. Now, he didn't violate any free speech standards. He did not defame specific individuals. He didn't incite violence. He didn't issue threats. So his comments did not cross those legal thresholds. But as an employee of a network, clearly not doing his job. Now, as we saw, the left will argue that this reflects government overreach or censorship via the FCC. And they talk about the comments that Brendan Carr made. Now, it's interesting, last year there was a case by the Supreme Court, Murthy versus Missouri 2024. And the Supreme Court clarified that government influence violates the First Amendment only when there's a clear and direct link between an official's actions and the suppression of speech. So in the case of what Brendan Carr said, it's nebulous. We're not actually sure if this directly influenced the decision to suspend him or take him off the air. But again, ultimately for me, this matters not about free speech. It's about performance and accountability. As an employee of a private corporation, for us, if those were our performance ratings at the end of a year, we would be fired, right? His responsibility is to generate value for the network. His inability to do so, declining viewership, suggests that his approach, shouldn't serve the company's interests. He should engage in humor that is more unifying, brings together a broader audience rather than alienating literally half the country every single night. So to me, it's good business sense, and hopefully his suspension is a wake-up call for the network and his own brand. So we'll see what happens. I wanted to ask this question, right, regarding Jimmy Kimmel. As Christians, right, we've heard about all the different nuances related to First Amendment rights, the FCC being involved, the Trump administration, the loss of his partners, the affiliate networks of ABC. But as Christians, right, what should be our response to Jimmy Kimmel?
That's a tough question, right? I think as a Christian, we are called to love. We are called to forgive. We are called to be humble. But on the other hand, we are responsible to call evil evil. We have a responsibility as Christians to fight against immorality wherever we see it. I don't like his content because of the fact that it doesn't align with my Christian values. I find it humorous that he would say that he follows the teachings of Jesus. Like, what does that even mean? If he was a Christian, come out and say it. But then I would challenge and say your life has no evidence that you are a follower of Christ. And if you're a Christian, your Christianity is not fire insurance. It's not like, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble, I need Jesus, right? To accept Jesus, to be a Christian, means he is your Lord and Savior. That lordship has responsibilities for it. You change your actions, you change the way you talk, you change your behavior, right? I think our response to Jimmy Kimmel's comments should be to complain to the network and say, this does not support my Christian values. This does not support my American worldview, right? There's a saying that the left likes to say a lot, where there should be a separation of church and state. And they imply that to mean that the church should not influence the state. But when Thomas Jefferson wrote that to a Baptist church, he directly implied that the state would not interfere in the church's activities. It was the other way around. The protection is that the state would not infringe on the church's beliefs. As Christians, we should influence politics. We should influence the way that social activities happen. It's our moral and our Christian obligation to influence those things.
It's so as a Christian, right, I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians chapter 10, where Paul says in verse 23 and 24, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor. Just because something is lawful doesn't mean you have to do it, right? That just means that it's just a boundary that you're not supposed to cross. This is not just specific to Jimmy Kimmel, right? Like a lot of the things that people talk, they speak, the things that are shown on TV, it's not aligned with Christian beliefs. It's malicious, it's provocative, it's evil, and it goes on all the time, right? So it's not only calling Jimmy Kimmel out, but this type of comedy, this type of sarcasm, where it crosses boundaries and challenges. None of this is Christian, but it's again not just Jimmy Kimmel, right? He's still within the boundaries of law. This whole world needs a change of heart. It's a heart that needs to change.
Yeah, I would agree with you guys. Excellent points there. In thinking about the Christian response to Jimmy Kimmel or anything, I think about two words: tough and tender. Be firm in your beliefs, be proactive in engaging politically, talking to the networks, writing letters, demanding that we have more family-based, value-based television, even on late nights. But secondly, be tender, right? People can change. I hope that tearful apology was genuine. We should be full of grace. We shouldn't stoop to those standards and, you know, dehumanizing half the country. And so our hearts should be tender towards him. We should pray for him without losing our toughness. And so I think, toughness and tenderness should be intertwined in the life of every Christian. And it's up to the Holy Spirit, the leading of the Holy Spirit, to determine how that actually plays out on a day-to-day basis.
Yep, excellent point. It's that how Jesus was full of grace and truth, right? It's that balance, and to make sure that you do both, it's a lifelong journey to be filled with the Spirit to do it.
Any other thoughts on Jimmy Kimmel?
I have very little patience for people that say they're Christian and act any which way. I think it's like, say you're a Muslim, like pick another religion other than Christianity and see what happens. There'll be outrage. I think the Christians in America have become very soft. I told you guys before, I think the primary reason why the left has moved so far to the extreme and has influenced our day in and day out life is because during the Billy Graham years, Christians did not speak out enough. We decided back then that don't ask, don't tell. It's okay, just accept their lifestyle. They want to come into TV shows and come into late night TV specials and movies. Yeah, let them have it, right? That is the first line of defense that falls. The second line of defense is acceptance. They are forcing you to accept their belief system. And if you can't accept it, you're not falling in line. If you cannot agree with what they want and it's not even about rights, right? It's not about like giving individuals rights on the left side. It is acceptance. They want you to believe what they believe. And for me, like that's why my parents migrated to the United States. That's why we're here in this country, is to have that freedom. When India moved into communism is where a lot of, especially from the South where we're from, is where a lot of people started leaving, because you couldn't say what you wanted to say without getting beat up. You couldn't practice religion the way you wanted to practice religion. You're forced to do it because the government told you to do it. Or, you took a beheading or a beating, very little protection. I don't want to see that happen to America. I think Christians have to be much more bolder and speak out more.
Yeah, excellent points. We're going to move on to another news story that has been taking over the news. The Trump administration announced sweeping changes to how H-1B visas are issued, calling for a $100,000 fee on foreign workers. So one video that we'll see is directly from the Oval Office, front and center. The president himself here.
We need workers. We need great workers. And this pretty much ensures that that's what's going to happen. I think, Sean, do you agree with that?
Well, they're $100,000 per year. So the whole idea is no more will these big tech companies or other big companies train foreign workers. They have to pay the government $100,000, then they have to pay the employee. So it's just non-economic. If you're going to train somebody, you're going to train one of the recent graduates from one of the great universities across our land, train Americans, stop bringing in people to take our jobs. That's the policy here, $100,000 a year for H-1B visas, and all of the big companies are on board. We've spoken to them about the gold card.
They love it. They love it. They really love it. They need it.
So you see there, explained directly from Trump, and essentially what this will do to the tech sector, is to be determined. The White House secretary issued a press statement because what you saw in that video was very vague here, but Caroline Leavitt explained this is not an annual fee, it's a one-time fee. Those who hold H-1B visas are currently outside of the country will not be charged that money to re-enter. Also clarifying that this was only for new visas and not renewals. So a very important part of that to, clarify what exactly that means. But when you look at the breakdown of this actual program and you think about the numbers behind the H-1B statistics, essentially you have a large part of these workers coming from India, I think over 70%, about 8% or 10% or so coming from China. What exactly is the H-1B program? And what is the history? Has it solved the problem that we are trying to solve? Is it inherently racist, as many people are saying? Your thoughts?
Yeah, so let me give you I'll do a quick rundown of like the H1B itself. But before that, let me just give you a couple of nuggets. It's very interesting. Of all billion-dollar startups, 55% was started by an immigrant not born in the US. And of all Fortune 500 companies in the US, 55% was founded by a first or second generation immigrant. So immigrants have always played a vital role in the flourishing of the US. So now I'll dive into the H-1B program itself. What the US government announced is a one-time fee, as they clarified, of $100,000 that must accompany new H-1B applications that are filed after September 21st. And the way that administration framed it is as an anti-abuse measure. So the H-1B program was instituted in 1990 as a non-immigrant visa program that allows U.S. employers to temporarily employ foreign workers in specialty occupations that require advanced knowledge and skill. And the purpose was to address the anticipated skill shortages in critical industries, particularly STEM. There were some studies that went into that decision making, and there are a lot of people who have critiqued those studies and how they probably overestimated the need, etc. But regardless, that was the intent. The key features is that it has to be a specialty occupation requiring theoretical and practical application of highly specialized knowledge. It's a 3-year visa that can be extended to a maximum of 6 years, and they can apply for green card while they're here. The total number is 85,000 visas every year, but 20,000 is strictly allocated to those who are graduating with a master's degree or higher from US universities. And there are also some exceptions. So universities, nonprofits, research institutions are not exempt, are exempt from this cap. So they are outside of this. There are also wage requirements, right? They are supposed to pay, employers are supposed to pay a salary that is equal or higher than the prevailing wage for the occupation location. So so it's all embedded in there, but there's been a lot of abuse. Employees can transfer between employers, but it's a burdensome process. So the stated intent, right? If you come back now to the $100,000 one time, the first time application fee, It's really to, number one, to protect American workers and wages by discouraging the abuse by some companies, particularly in the IT staffing and outsourcing sector, of hiring temporary foreign workers at lower wages. So they're able to lure a lower age because the H1B worker has not as much of a voice to demand a higher salary. The second one is to prioritize the best and the brightest. So they're revamping, their plan is to revamp the lottery system. So right now the lottery system is just of all the applications, it will randomly pick the numbers. So what they are doing is they're going to incentivize positions that have higher wages. Okay, so the higher wages will be weighted in this lottery system. And the idea is to encourage more senior level, more skilled, higher compensation hiring. The other thing it's going to do is going to curb some of the spamming that happens. So a lot of applications come in to the system. So this $100,000 makes a barrier and kind of stop that spamming technique. Now, some of the concerns, right? There is a disadvantage to get really good entry-level talent. So a mid-career, low-paid profession could be prioritized because they eventually get a higher salary than a data scientist who's at the entry level, even though the data scientist is really what we need. So that's one disadvantage. And the other big disadvantage from what I've heard is that smaller companies and startups, they may not be able to pay so much money upfront to get the desperate talent they need. So this is the framing of what's going on in the H1B visa rule.
Yeah, excellent background, excellent breakdown of that. And the first thing that people hear on the news, thinking about these changes in the H1B policy program, visa program, especially on the left, this is racist. Trump is a racist. He's keeping immigrants out of the country. So the question I want to ask, is this policy inherently racist?
I'm going to get on my soapbox again. And I get so triggered by the racist, fascist, narcissist, all the ists. It's like, you cannot disagree. You cannot agree. You cannot do anything without someone calling you a bigot or a racist. And I think it like kills conversation. I pray, like sincerely pray that as a country, we can move past all of the name calling and get down to the issue, right? I at the heart of it, there is a disparity between different races that take advantage of the H1B visa. It doesn't make the policy racist. Trump, in the announcement, told you exactly why he wanted to do this policy. And I don't think Trump is a type of person that won't tell you why he's doing what he's doing. You might read into it, he might have alternative plans, but he at least gives you a reason why he does it. And more often than not, people don't play that because they don't want to hear the reason. They just want to call him a racist or a bigot. The number one reason why he did it is because with AI moving in, being at the centerfold, there is a lot of talent internationally. If you look at China, you look at Pakistan, you look at other countries, they have a lot of talent. The problem with the United States is we don't have a lot of talent in AI space. Matter of fact, like companies are paying hundreds of millions of dollars just to keep one engineer, hundreds of thousands of dollars as sign-on bonus to keep one engineer. There is a drastic shortage of the talent pool. So you would think H1B makes sense. Like you bring in people from other countries, they could populate it. But the problem with AI talent is you need to grow it in-house because otherwise all the generations that follow after us cannot compete in this space, right? It's not like programming where you teach someone a language and maybe they could pick it up on their own, right? Actually building the AI models at this juncture in human history is very critical. Now, I haven't really formulated my opinion of the H1B visa um, and if I like the policy or not, but I don't think it's racist. To answer the core question, I don't think it's racist. I think it's business driven. I think it's thinking about long-term viability of the American workforce. And, one of the other topics that is interesting is I wonder how many H1B visas are applying for green cards, and I haven't seen that trend data. Like in the past, if you look at the generation before AI really took over, right? I'm not talking about like a period of 20 years, right? talking about 5 to 10 years, you saw a lot more people coming in and applying for green cards and going for citizenship because that's the path they wanted to take. I think the latest trend, and this is not verified, I'm just speculating. I think the latest trend is people come into the country, they learn the technology, they do their 3 years or whatever, learn the technology, and they go back to countries where they're heavily investing in that same technology and they set up their own companies and their own organization. I've read a report that some of this H1B stuff is related to that, where you do have such an influx of people coming in, learning our technology, taking advantage of it, and then going back to their country, setting up their own businesses, and the US cannot go back into there and compete. Specifically China, specifically India. These countries are taking advantage of our institutions and our learning opportunities in the United States and then shipping that talent overseas, which is not what the heart of the H-1B visa program was. The point of the visa was to bring talent in-house and cultivate that innovation in-house and have them be part of the American story. And I don't think you're seeing that happen anymore. I'm off the soapbox. You could talk.
Yeah, no, excellent point. So, is this H-1B visa program inherently racist? I don't even want to dignify a response to this because the word racism now is used everywhere. Like, you speak out against any policy on the left, you're called racist. Vote Republican, you're called racist. You're pro-life, you're racist. You believe in closed borders, oh, now you're racist. You're a capitalist, now you're racist because you hate marginalized communities. You believe in personal responsibility, now you're racist because you don't believe in funding every solution in the world with government money. So I believe this word racist is thrown around. It's honestly lost its meaning. And sadly, this is another issue where people are throwing around the word racist when really it's a matter of generating economic value for workers and companies. So the issue of racism, I don't think is anywhere relevant in this discussion at all. But a question I do want to ask, and this is a tougher question regarding H-1B visas and the recent changes, is it good for the U.S. labor force and the economy? Some of you have touched on this a little bit, but in general, what do you think the net effect will be looking down the line now that this policy has changed?
That's the key, right? To be strategic. Like, this is all about a future-looking strategy. I'll give you some examples. If you look at the type of graduation rates we are seeing by country, because STEM is really important, right? About 41% of graduates in China are in the STEM field. 30% of Indian graduates are in the STEM field. Only 20% of the US graduates are in the STEM field. So the numbers, because China is huge, right? That corresponds to 3.6 million graduates from China, 2.6 million from India, and 1,000 from the US. So that's what you're seeing. And then some of the stats I was seeing is like, there are other degrees like psychology and education that's trumping even the STEM. So are we motivating the next generation into the right fields? Because it is expected that STEM jobs are going to grow at twice the rate than other jobs in the US. So there is a concept of pursuing your passion, but you have to also be practical in what you pursue. And are we doing that strategically as a nation is a question.
And
It is, yeah.
good pivot point, right? Where Charlie Kirk talked about this all the time, where he kept saying college is a scam, right? And it was a triggering question, but the question inherently fits into this H1B visa situation, where are we sending kids to school for the right reasons? Are they coming out of school with degrees that they can't do anything with and can't make a salary? It goes back to the WNBA and NBA conversation. Like, why is the NBA player getting paid more than the female WNBA player? Because more people watch it, right? It's much more engaging of a sport versus like the viewership of the WNBA. So if you kind of extrapolate all that back to like my first point, I think as we focus as a society on questions that don't matter, like is the H-1B visa a racist decree, right? That's the wrong question to focus on. The better question is, at the heart of the H-1B visa, is it still accomplishing the same goals that it did back in the 80s, back in the 90s, back in the 2000s? Or do we need to change that model? Do we need to figure out what's at the heart of the problem? And if you can't ask the right questions, you can have the right conversations. And I think that's what we're losing as part of this overarching attack from the left about calling the H1B visa a racist declaration, right? Like, forget about race in that conversation. Let's go back to the heart of the problem. Is it the right approach for America? Or is Trump making the wrong approach? Like, you can have a conversation about that. And I think that is a very important conversation to have.
Yeah, I think me thinking through this issue, I flip-flopped here. I think there are some pros, but I think when it comes to H-1B visas and the new policy, I think the cons of this actually outweigh the pros. Now, I'll start with the pros. I think at the very least, it starts the conversation of how, U.S. companies can begin prioritizing the hiring of U.S. workers. As you guys mentioned, I think hopefully we'll have conversations about how we can bridge the STEM gap in U.S. education. Maybe we'll start thinking seriously about this because the numbers show we are lagging far behind the world. But the cons of this policy, why I think this announcement will have an ultimate negative effect, I think it creates this illusion of job creation. It creates this visceral sense that it protects American
Right.
jobs, that we're going to hire more American engineers. But the economic reality is more complex. Research, a lot of people are saying this, H-1B workers help companies grow, and they lead to more jobs for Americans, not fewer, especially when it comes to startups, high-growth companies, and emerging fields. The net effect is going to be less jobs for U.S. engineers, specifically because of the threats of startups and innovative companies and new companies. Many high-growth companies, take Google, take Amazon, Tesla. In their formative years, they relied heavily on immigrant talent. You create this steep fee now, you're going to raise barriers for new startups, you're going to stifle the next generation of innovation. Now think about the emergent fields. You guys touched on this: AI, biotech, quantum computing. We're cutting off access to global talent with these new H-1B visa rules. Is the U.S. going to be in a strategic position in these sectors to compete worldwide? Empirical studies show that immigrant workers contribute disproportionately to patents, entrepreneurship, and productivity gains. You guys touched on this, talking about the CEOs and many people in Silicon Valley and starting up companies. We're going to face brain drain, sadly. The smartest and most ambitious workers wanted to come to the US. Now they're going to look at this $100,000 fee and they're going to say, we want to go to Canada, we want to go to the UK, we want to go to other destinations that are more welcoming with more friendlier immigration policies in terms of their visas. And so I think we're going to weaken America's role as a place for a global hub for talent. Finally, we already have this weakness in our U.S. STEM pipeline. We already struggle with this gap in STEM education and undersupply of homegrown engineers, limiting access to the H-1B visa talent pool. I think it's going to worsen the skills shortage. So, in my head, if I was the economist right now, I'm not. If I was in the White House, I would propose a more balanced solution. How do we avoid the extremes of like unrestricted access or a very prohibitive $100,000 barrier? So again, this is me putting on my economics hat. I think my fee structure will be incremental. Start with a $50,000 fee in 2026, increase it 10,000 over time. I think this would allow businesses to gradually adopt. It prevents a sudden shock to the labor market, which many companies are experiencing. You can provide targeted exemptions. If I was the economist, I would say give exemptions to startups, give exemptions to research-driven companies, give exemptions to companies in high-growth strategic fields, AI, biotech, quantum computing, clean energy. We want American companies to remain competitive in the industries that will define the future. I would say have some type of domestic hiring requirement. Maybe enforce companies to demonstrate that at least 80 or 90% of their workforce consists of U.S. workers. Let's help guarantee that our domestic labor pool is accessed and used here in countries. So very complex topic, I think. Initially, you look at this and you think, we're going to get all these jobs back to the American people, but I don't think that'll happen. So we'll see how
Yeah,
this all plays
I,
out.
I, I think you're right. No, I don't know. I agree and disagree with some of your points. I think the enforcement of the 100K will probably have the short-term benefits that Trump is thinking, where people are going to invest more in their talent pool and training internally. I just don't think that training is there. Like, I don't think the right material exists for AI, where people are focused on building companies, are focused on building the right talent that we need to succeed. So if you extend that policy to give tax breaks for better in-house education or something, I don't think it goes far enough to accomplish the goals that you want.
Yeah, those are excellent points. Absolutely.
I was just doing some rough math. Can you guys confirm 85,000 new applications times $100,000 per application?
Yeah, billion. 8.5 billion.
I can tell you that for the most part, there is a lot of abuse of the H1B, especially with consultancy firms. There's a lot of entry-level people coming. The idea was to really get high-skilled people, and that's not really what's happening. And on average, there are studies that say that the salaries that they pay the H1B workers is about 30 to 40% less than what they should have paid the worker in the US. People have found a way to abuse the system. Like as expected, most people are just like below average, and there is probably like about 20%, probably like 30% who's above average and 5% who's really good. That we should grab them, right? The question, like you guys were alluding to, is the idea of H1B was always to be a temporary program, right, with path to green card. The question, and I think Trump once mentioned this. Like, do we just basically say that if you have been selected to our master's program or whatever in the US, you have automatically a path to green card and citizenship, which means you're creating that pathway so that they don't go back to their country of origin, which is exactly what is happening. There's a lot of people who've gone back to India, back to China, and they start their own businesses over there. And we have lost all that valuable experience they gained from here. So I think in one of our podcasts, upcoming podcasts, we should think about how do we attract the right talent and keep and really increase the IQ of the American population overall over time, and like keep us on the edge of like being the best in the world.
Yeah, excellent topic for future podcasts. Wrapping this up, you think about as a Christian, right? How should we approach this topic? We're dealing with this issue that's going to be recurring of immigration versus domestic interests. And so as believers, what advice would you give to another believer who's in your party or maybe in another party, and you want to approach this from a biblical worldview?
I think most of the Constitution is set up in a way that it supports for immigration, right? It thinks about the foreigner in your land, and that was heavily influenced by the Bible. The American economy in the information Bidget was presenting has benefited a lot from foreign talent, foreign innovation coming in. And that's why it's like such a dual-edged sword when you talk about immigration and illegal immigration. Like on one side, if you have illegal immigration, you have people that are undocumented working for a much lower salary than the general population, which drives down wages, right? And it fuels the greed of corporate America, where it's like, I want to maximize my profit. And so you have these greedy corporations, right? If you can stop the illegal immigration coming into this country, right, and you raise the wages, you take a short-term hit in your economy, in your metrics and your stock holdings and your returns, right? Because you have to make up that gap. The net effect of that is the middle class gets elevated, because now you're getting back to McDonald's workers being able to buy or rent apartments in the areas that they are working in, which today is not a fact, right? You get paid, I don't know, $10 an hour, whatever minimum wages nowadays, and the rent is like $1,500. There's just no way you're going to afford that, right? So now you're commuting to work and traveling. I think if you go back to the H1 topic, it goes back to, we allowed for a lot of shortcuts in this country for political reasons, and because of that, it's collapsing the very fabric of the society, and we have to autocorrect some things, right? We got to go back in and secure the borders. We have to enforce better wages. One of the things that kills me is, why the heck does corporations have the right to own single family homes, right, and apartments, and impose their own rent? And like, some apartments are just sitting there when you have a homelessness crisis, right? I think we have to go in and reduce some of that nonsense that we allowed, but at the same time, allow for immigration to continue the normal way, where you come into any house, you walk in through the front door, right? There is a process in place. And I like some of the suggestions you guys offered up where, if you get into a master's program or a doctorate program, especially in the STEM field, there's a pathway to citizenship. You definitely don't want to lose that talent. I think the Christian view is you got to hold the line. You don't compromise on things because it's hard. You show compassion to the world around you. But, I wouldn't let a stranger into my house because they're poor. I would definitely take in a person in the name of Christ and share a meal with them, give them a warm bed, right? But they can't live in my house indefinitely unless like God's put that on my heart to do so. But even then, there's an evaluation period there. Right now, you just have a wide open door and say, like, come into my house and stay there for free. Matter of fact, abuse everything that's there. That's just not a Christian worldview.
Yeah, my take on it is, right, specifically to the H1B program, right? Just to put in context, we are talking about what, 345 million people in the US roughly right now. The total applications for H1B, including new applications plus renewals, were 400,000. 65% of them are renewal. Only 35% of the 400,000 is new. So, we are talking about what, 0.1 something percent, right? We're not talking about a big number at all. That is something that we can absorb. It is through the legal pathway. It's a lawful thing, right? As Christians, we always want to follow the law as long as it doesn't contradict with God's word. So it is lawful, and I don't have any problem with that. I think the 100,000 fee is meant to, if it's truly meant to stop abuse, right? Sure. It just make sure that it's enforced correctly, but also make sure that some of the concerns that were raised, like how about the startup companies who can't afford it, or smaller companies, make sure that those new upcoming companies are not penalized for this reason. But yeah, I think as long as I don't see this is okay. I think from a Christian worldview, it's fine to do it, right? But I think we do need to have a broad discussion about immigration in general, how we were founded on Judeo-Christian principles. What are we doing today to maintain it? Or is it slipping out of our hands? What can we learn from other Western countries and their experiences, like the UK and France, and what we see there? So that's a serious topic that we have to discuss, broadly, but specifically for the H1B, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's a legal thing. The only thing that we truly need to understand, is it really hitting the goal that it was intended to do? Is there do we need to revamp the whole program based on what we want the US to be in 10, 20 years from now?
Yeah, no, excellent points. As for me, I think about what is our Christian worldview towards immigration policies, whether it's H1B visas or the border. I don't have a specific policy recommendation, but maybe an overarching principle. And I think the balance is we need to balance our duty to love one another, love our neighbors specifically, and balance a lawful and orderly and compassionate response to immigrants. What is our duty to love our neighbor? I think that means we think about local domestic workers. We think about our inner city communities. We think about our poor rural communities. We think about middle-class families. We think about the fact that the unemployment rate among new grads is slightly higher than the general unemployment rate. And we balance that with a lawful, orderly, and compassionate response to immigration. Neither should be neglected, but our neighborly duty should certainly not be deprioritized either. And so I think there's a balance here between those two communities. Any final thoughts on this topic?
It's very, I think we do need to talk about it more, have a deep dive into it, because I try to think back to, because when we talk it from a Christian perspective, from a biblical perspective, we think about Israel and how they were sojourners and foreigners who were in the land. That's why God constantly talks about them. But you do see that they had to follow the laws of the Israelites, the rule that God instituted for the nation of Israel, that whoever comes in, they can come in. He didn't ask them to stop them from coming in. But they could not bring in their pagan gods and completely sideline Israel's mandated methods and laws and regulations of whatever it is, right? Whether it's ceremonial or the law. I would like to think through America and the future of America and immigration from that perspective. It'll be a very interesting podcast for us to take on. If we were to, I guess from a blue sky thinking perspective, if we truly had the power to, we had a blank slate and we could design the full policy starting today, not starting when the country was founded, starting today, 2025. how could we craft it in a way that this would be a God-fearing country for generations to come?
Excellent thought. Yeah, definitely something to ponder and think about. So cool idea. Cool. Anyway, thank you guys for joining this podcast.
I'm okay with